Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Concordia University's Force Space. Thanks for joining us for today's event, Digital Well-Being and Social Media Overuse. These are insights from psychology, technology, and policy. We would like to begin by acknowledging that Concordia University is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. We respect the continued connections with the past, the present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. Here at Force Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge, co-creating daily activities that examine research questions and projects happening across the university. We're running today's event as a live stream to both YouTube and as a Zoom meeting. So for those of you joining us there, if you have any comments, questions, pop those into the chat. We can read them out a little bit later. Those of you here in the space, just raise your hand and we can bring a microphone around so that everyone can hear. I'd like to introduce our host for this morning. Iman Goodzari is a doctoral candidate in the Department of Marketing at the John Molson School of Business. His research explores how interventions such as AI-generated nudges and haptic feedback can mitigate the negative consequences of social media overuse, including addiction and excessive digital consumption. And he's particularly interested in the characteristics of AI and that can help individuals balance their digital lives while minimizing the harmful effects of social media overuse. It's very much my pleasure now to hand the microphone over to Iman, and also our current public scholar here at Concordia. Iman, good morning.
Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for joining us both in person and online. So today we want to talk about a topic that touches every one of us, right? Digital well-being and social media overuse. During the past decade, social media actually has become part of our lives and technically part of our bodies. We cannot live anymore without our social media or without our cell phones. So understanding how technology, and more specifically social media, is really important now, because understanding how they affect our behaviors, how they shape our minds, and actually our policies has never been more important. So today, I am honored to host three wonderful and exceptional guest speakers who each bring their own unique and essential perspective and lens to this conversation. So thank you for joining me. From psychology, we have Dr. Mark Griffiths, who is a chartered psychologist and distinguished professor of behavioral addiction at the Nottingham Trent University in England. He is a leading expert in behavioral addictions like gambling and gaming addictions. From information systems, we have Dr. Mahdi Mirhoseini, an assistant professor of business technology management here at John Molson School of Business. His research focuses on dark side of IT, human-computer interaction, design science, and user experience. And from government, we are joined by Mr. Enrico Ciccone. I believe that most of you might know him, a member of the National Assembly of Quebec and vice chair of the province's Special Committee on Screen Time, working directly on policy solutions to help youth and families mitigate digital life more safely. So together they represent the mind, the technology, and the policy, the three pillars that we all need to understand the full picture. So before we dive into the discussion, I would love for each of you to briefly introduce yourself if you want and explain your perspective that you are bringing today. So we can start. So we can start by Mark.
Okay, hi there, everybody. Sorry, I can't be there in person. Okay, so I'm Mark. I've been in the field of behavioural addiction for the last 38 years. I started back in 1987 researching gambling addiction. I then, in 1989, went on to research video game addiction. In 1996, I was the very first person in the world to publish an academic paper on internet addiction. And then, since then, I've done stuff on sex addiction, exercise addiction, work addiction. I mean, you name it. If it doesn't involve the ingestion of a psychoactive substance, I've done it. And in 2010, I started researching on social media addiction. Now, I don't want to go, I mean, if you give me the mic, I can just go on and on and on. However, I do want to say that when I use the word addiction, I'm using the word addiction related to social media in exactly the same way as I'd use it for the word addiction to cocaine addiction or heroin addiction or gambling addiction. And anybody that's read my work will know that I've got a very specific way of conceptualizing addiction. And when I use the word addiction, I'm using it and defining it in a way that any behavioral any behavior that fulfills my criteria for addiction, I would operationally define that as a true behavioral addiction. So if I apply this to social media, the first thing is I would expect is that social media is the single most important thing in this person's life, and they do it to the neglect of everything else. So that's something I call salience or preoccupation. The second thing is that if you're genuinely addicted to something, is that if it was social media, is that people use it as a way to modify their mood, either to get buzzed up, high, aroused, and excited, or to do the exact opposite, to relax, to tranquilize, to escape, to numb. The third thing is tolerance. So the idea, if somebody's genuinely addicted to a behavior, is that over time, I would expect that person to actually use that behavior or engage in that behavior more and more and more. So you might have started off engaging in social media for 30 minutes a day, an hour a day. 6 months later, it might be 3 hours a day. A year later, it might be 10 or 14 hours a day. And so I'd expect to see that pattern. The fourth thing is what we call withdrawal symptoms. And if you're genuinely addicted to social media and you're unable to engage in social media, I would expect people to have both psychological withdrawal symptoms, so things like frustration, anxiety, panic attacks, etc. But also on a physiological level, I would expect people to have nausea, stomach cramps. I mean, the things that you would associate with more traditional drug addictions. But the most important component for me is conflict. I mean, anything that's genuinely addictive is going to be something that compromises your relationship, compromises your occupation or education, depending on what age you are. And, I always get asked the question, what's the difference between a healthy excessive enthusiasm and an addiction? And for me, it's very, very simple. Healthy excessive enthusiasms add to life and addictions take away from them. And then finally, we've got relapse. I mean, somebody who is genuinely addicted to something, who does manage to become abstinent for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or even 2 years, if they start engaging in that behavior again, you'll go straight back into the addictive cycles you're in before. So my basic message is that you would have to fulfill all of those 6 components that I've just outlined to be genuinely addicted to social media. And by my criteria, actually very few people would be classed genuinely as having a social media addiction. What you're more likely to have is to have somebody who has a problematic use with social media rather than an addiction by my criteria. And even though I get accused of watering down the concept of addiction because I apply it to things like social media, I actually think that my criteria are very, very strict. So I'll leave it there. Actually, I just want to say one more thing. Okay, even though I'm a psychologist, I take a biopsychosocial view of addiction. Quite clearly, addictions result from a person's biological genetic predisposition plus a person's psychological disposition, their personality traits, their attitudes, their expectations, their beliefs. Also, we are, human beings that have a social environment around us. So there are quite clearly situational characteristics, things like advertising, marketing, that might influence whether we acquire that behavior in the first place. And then finally, is that we have the structural characteristics of the activity itself. What do people design into, for instance, in this case, what do people design into social media platforms as a way to get you to come back again and again and again? So I know I've gone on a bit of a monologue there, but that's where I'm coming from. That's my kind of 38 years of studying psychology of addiction in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Mark. You already set the stage for us, and that was really nice, talking about your experience and expertise on addiction and behavioral addiction. And definitely we will go deeper into that, and we will talk more about the differences and all those things. So from our in-person panelists, so we can start with Dr. Mahdi Mirhoseini.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello, so hi Mark. I'm glad to be here with you today. I'm Mahdi Mirhoseini. I'm a faculty at the John Molson School of Business, and my subfield is the dark side of technology. So I mainly focus on, so there are different topics that I do research on, like fake news and privacy, and also on addiction to technology. But in all of that, my main focus on how we can design nudges and technological interventions so we can help people to be more resistant And specifically about technology addiction, we have I've had a couple of students working on that, and also we have a course here that we teach at the PhD level, and we read a lot of Mark's paper in that course. We use his conceptualization of behavioral addiction. So today I'll be talking about the insight from technology and what technological features specifically are going to contribute to the formation of dependency to technology, and also how we can use these technological interventions. A few examples from my own research that we can help users to develop healthier habits.
Thank you so much, Mahdi. Yeah, and Mr. Ciccone.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Iman, Dr. Griffith, Dr. Mahdi. I'm very privileged to be around such a scientific like you guys. I'm a legislator, a member of parliament, and of course, we take decisions, we make laws to protect our society. And in this matter, it started in 2019 when myself and a colleague of mine in my party, we asked for a special commission about the impact of the screens and video games on kids, and the government didn't apply what we asked for a commission. So last year in 2024-23, I believe, another party asked for a situation to view the impact of the cell phone in schools. So with that, the government decided to create a special commission. So in our party, we added the video games, we added all the social media and everything. So that's why there was a commission put in place, and it took us 11 months to create a report. And I would like to say it first and foremost, I am not a scientific. We talked to a lot of scientific, we talked to a lot of fields of people, a lot of organization, and they came up with, we even talked to kids. We went around, we saw about 17 schools, we talked to 500 kids, private, English, French schools all over Quebec, in many regions. We talked to many doctors, pediatrician, psychologists in every country. We even spoke to Dr. Griffith, to a legislator that did the same thing, the commission in your country that came to us and explained how they did it. So we took some notes, and we divided our research report in five categories. We saw the screens and young people. We have screens in schools, social media, video games, and exposure to online content. That's where we focused on, and we came up with 56 recommendations. Now this report it's been on the table, given to the government since May 2025, and now the government has the decision to do whatever they want with it. But they took one already, which is they banned phones in the school from morning till night. So we see a difference a little bit, but we don't have all the numbers, but we know how the kids think. I was in a school about 3 days ago. We talked about it, and we could share, as long as we go what the kids told us. But that's what has been done. It's tough to put some new policies, make legislation on things. We don't want to get into the homes. We don't want to tell the parents how to raise their kids. But still, there's prevention, and there's things that we could help them with. Because if you think about all the families, socioeconomic situation, a lot of parents, they cannot give and help the same way that everybody can do. They can teach their kids in education. So there's a table. Put the table on my side.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know that you are doing a great job in Quebec, and Quebec is kind of a leading province in well-being and digital well-being. And I really appreciate that. So now I prepared a couple of questions, and then I give the audience to have the chance to ask their questions, because I know that it's going to be a timely phenomenon. So everyone might feel related to what's happening now. So let's start the questions from psychology and some of the basics of what's happening in addiction and social media addiction. So my question for Mark is, technically, one of the questions that everyone might have is, what's the difference between social media addiction and simply social media overuse? Because, for example, there might be some people who are on their phone, using their social media for hours a day, and they are afraid now. Should we name them an addiction or no? So I would appreciate if you can explain a little bit more about the differences between social media overuse and social media addiction.
Okay, so obviously the word addiction, I do think is overused in and of itself. So every single week, without fail, I get emails from parents usually saying my son's addicted to video games or my daughter's addicted to social media. And it is, I rarely get emails from parents about their sons being addicted to social media. It tends to be more female based than males, and the males tend to be more to do with gaming. However, when I write back to the parents and I say, why do you think your children, why do you think your child is addicted to social media? And the most common answer I get is they'll say, it's because my child is on it 3 or 4 hours a day. And then I write back and I say, oh, yeah, we psychologists, we've got a word for that. It's called normal, because that is what the kids of today do. Now, I've got 3 children myself, okay? I say they're children, they're now all young adults, but they are screenagers. They were, they're digital natives. They were brought up in a world where they've never known a world without the internet. They've never known a world without smartphones. They've never known a world without interactive television. Okay, so we've now got this situation that quite clearly being on all the time, being online, that has become a way of being for young people. And what parents tend to do, they tend to pathologize their own children's behavior. And basically, they confuse excess with addiction. Okay. Now, for me, the question you've asked me, what's the difference between overuse and addiction? Well, we've got to remember is that some people can actually spend excessive amounts of time using technology and actually have no negative detrimental effects whatsoever. And for me, if there are if you're a parent, and obviously I like to think I've been a responsible parent, while my own children were growing up. The things I always thought to myself as a parent, I've got to make sure that my children are doing their education, they're doing their physical education, they have a good social network and they're developing their social skills. And I want them to do the things around the house, learn to be a good citizen, do their chores and interact with, society and community. If my kids are doing all of those things, then I've got no problem if they're still spending a lot of time on technology, if it isn't interfering with that list I've just outlined. So, to give you a typical example, my son, he's an avid gamer. He does use social media a lot as well, but he's certainly an avid gamer and has been all his life from a very early age, of about 6 or 7 years of age. As a parent, I never said he couldn't go on social media or couldn't go on. Well, actually, social media came a bit later, but as a 6 or 7 year old, I never said you can't play video games, but I made sure as a parent that things like education, physical education, and developing those social skills came before doing that. Now, my son was somebody who used to go to school, come home, and as soon as he'd done his homework, as soon as he'd done the chores I want him to do around the house, as soon as, and he was somebody who was always, even now, very, very sporty, very, very physically active. What he did in his spare time didn't bother me too much. And I have to ask, when I was his age, what did I used to do? And I actually used to watch 3 or 4 hours of television every day. Okay. Now, none of my kids particularly watch television when they grew up. They spend a lot of time actually on video games and on social media. And that is what kids do today. And even in socializing, kids spend a lot of time. When I talk about kids, I'm talking about the kind of 7 to 11-year-olds. Even now, they're spending a lot of time online interacting with their friends. And that's probably even more prominent when we go the kind of 11 to 17-year-old age group. So we have to distinguish between excess, overuse, and addiction. And to say, lots of my research have shown is that when gaming or playing social media, there are lots of people that do things to excess and there's no negative consequences whatsoever. And if there's no negative consequences, then for me, that's not overuse and it's not addiction. However, there are some people who overuse social media, but they're not addicted. So for instance, if you're somebody where your social media use is actually having a negative impact on your education, or it's having a negative impact because you don't engage in anything physically active, that I might say that's overuse, bordering on problematic without being an addiction. And then finally, as I talked about in my opening introduction, I have 6 criteria how I define addiction. And when I apply it to social media, very, very few people would be genuinely, by my definition, being classed as addicted to social media. But if it's something, as I say, if social media is interrupting your productivity, or it's interrupting your your personal relationships, your family, your friends, etc., as I say, if it's getting in the way of something in your life without necessarily being an addiction, to me that would be overuse. But I think the vast majority of people are engaged in what I would call habitual behavior, which isn't necessarily problematic at all, even though some parents and some teachers might pathologize that behavior because children and adolescents are spending so long on social media applications.
Okay, thank you so much. So based on your talk, I would say if there's no negative consequences, that's fine. It might be a social media overuse. But just to make it clear in terms of the negative consequences, because in your definition of addiction, you have 6 components. And do you believe that if somebody is a social media addict, they should have all those 6 components, or maybe 5 out of 6 might be as an addiction?
No. So for me, you have to fulfill all 6 of those components. And remember, some of those components in and of themselves are not necessarily negative. So things like mood modification or being a salient activity in your life on its own is not necessarily problematic or is related to addiction in and of itself. But and I know it's a very hard line, and people say I am too hard line by saying you have to fulfill all of those 6. So if somebody fulfills 4 or 5 of those, then I would probably define that person as having a problematic behavior rather than an addictive behavior. And as I say, when I'm using the word addiction, I'm using it in exactly the same way as I would apply it to a drug addiction or a cocaine addiction or another behavioral addiction. I mean, we've only basically got 2 behavioral addictions that are recognized by the World Health Organization and the American Psychiatric Association, and that's gambling addiction and gaming addiction in the form of gaming disorder and gambling disorder. Social media addiction, social media disorder, that has no formal recognition by any established body at the moment. And that's mainly because we don't have the empirical base like we've got with gambling and gaming at the moment. But I do think that in the future, social media and excess use of social media where it becomes problematic and disordered, I think that's got a very good chance of being classed as a disorder in the future, because I do think the empirical base is now growing at a biological level, a psychological level, and a sociological level. But yeah, to answer your question, Iman, is that you have to fulfill, by my definition, all 6 criteria to be classed as an addict. But of course, you can get 50 psychologists in a room and we'll all give you, all working in the addiction field, and we'll all give you a slightly different definition of what it is to be addicted.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you so much. So now we have a kind of psychology of the psychology side of the social media addiction or problematic use, let's say. So now let's look at the technology, how technologies themselves shape addictive behavior. So Mahdi, can you tell us more about how do platforms' features contribute to this compulsive use from an information system?
Yeah, thank you. To just continue on what Mark was saying, so before I talk about the features of technology, I want to talk a little bit about how we should see the role of technology in general in this formation of addiction, or I completely agree that addiction is a very strong word, but even in like formation of bad habits, if you want to call them. So technology, we call it technology addiction, but it's not. We don't get addicted to the object. It's addiction to the behavior. So we get addicted to the usage of behavior, to what we do with technology. But the way our brain works is that it associates the reward that we get from doing something with the object and the contextual factors that we do that behavior. So that's why if you, for example, when you pick up your phone or when you see a notification on your social media, it gives you a feeling of pleasure. That there is someone who reacted to your post, so it associates somehow with the object of technology, and that's why we call that technology addiction, but it's basically to what we do with technology. So in talking about technology factors, I think the most important one is the convenience, because behavioral addiction existed before, as Mark said. Gambling, it's a form of behavioral addiction, existed before, but technology has made it much easier to get reward from types of behavior than before. And if you can, so one of our basic needs is like social gratification, the reward that we get from interacting with others. Let's say knowing what other people think about us, about the content that we produce, and also us commenting on others, knowing what they do. So this needs, just imagine the time before mobile devices and social media platforms. We had to, let's say, call someone, write a letter to someone, or like organize an event to get that information and to satisfy that need. But now it's just as easy as just picking up your phone and just take a picture and post it on your social media. And this is like about one of our needs, but if you think about your other things that we do with social media and technology, like browsing news, for example, knowing what's going around us, you see that how it's much easier now to do that. So that's why I would say it's easier to develop like dependency create a bad habit or develop a behavioral addiction with the use of technologies. So that convenience, I think it's the most important factor, and it applies to a range of like behavior and also the things that we do with our mobile phone. Another factor that I wanted to talk about is like which is unique to some applications, is like the graphical design of these applications, that they create like a positive experience when you go through them. For example, you feel it's very similar when you walk into a casino. Like the design, it's like it's intriguing. You like that with all the colors. It's like a fantasy world. And when you compare that to all the graphical features of, for example, mobile games, or when you're for example, on Candy Crush, when there's a blast on matching these objects, or even the notifications that you see on Facebook or Instagram, or when you're browsing through your reels on Instagram, just the way the layout is designed, it's very pleasing to the eyes. So it gives a positive emotion. So that's something that it keeps you going on social media. The other factor I wanted to talk about, and I'm going to stop after that, is something that we are doing currently research on, and that's very unique to social media platforms, and that's the perception of anonymity that it gives to people. So when people can create anonymous accounts on most of these social media, but there are different levels of anonymity they give to users. But this perception of anonymity is important because, again, it gives people an experience that they don't usually get in real world. They can express themselves more free. And this has negative sides. Like there are lots of research on perception of anonymity and trolling, that when you perceive as anonymous, you don't feel bounded by the social norms, so you can say whatever comes to your mind on social media. You can just insult people and just say negative things that you wouldn't normally say because there are consequences. And also, it has also positive side, which is often neglected, that it's also people who don't share their opinion, they feel vulnerable, for example. They feel, again, more free to express their opinion. So this is called like disinhibition effect. So it has negative disinhibition and positive disinhibition effect. So both of them, they are giving users something that they don't experience normally. And again, it's kind of, from all of these, it helps people to have a rewarding behavior, rewarding experience with the technology.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I do agree with the accessibility of the technology these days, because now it's in our pocket. We don't need to go and buy cocaine, and it's not illegal. So it's quite illegal, socially accepted. So it really affects the behavior. And the triggers, definitely, like casino and anonymity. That's really interesting. I never thought about that, but that's completely true. So that makes us think about the policies, because it seems that people cannot help themselves and technology won't help them. Of course, they want to just exploit people. So can you explain a little bit more about what you have come up with in your report and the policies and regulations actually Quebec is already done?
Well, you know what we've done, and I've talked about it a little bit before, is that the one they applied right away, and they even applied it before the report was finished, because we brought it into the chamber. This is a policy, and if you want to do it, you should do it now. Recommendation, because the school year, because we're in May, if you want to get things ready for a school year that starts the end of February, you should do it now. And the government took it right away. It's, like I said before, it's the cell phone. From the first second you put your foot in the school until you get out. And why we, and I'll go on that topic because this is a very important topic, and what we saw, the difference, because us, we don't have that scientific views like doctors we have here today, like Dr. Griffith and Dr. Mahdi. We don't do that. It's just we see problems and we try to connect. Dr. Griffith was saying earlier, he goes, in my generation, we used to watch TV 3 to 4 hours a day. Me, I used to be outside and playing hockey. That's maybe because why you became a doctor, Dr. Griffith, and I became a pro athlete in the National Hockey League. Because we are different, but we didn't have those games, we didn't have those phones, and so that's why we have to offer something extra. If you don't want the kids on the phones or the screens or video games, you have to offer something extra. But the thing is, with what we have to apply ourselves and see what's going on before we advance in our suggestion, is that we see numbers going up, obesity in kids. One of my files is healthy living. We see obesity going up. We see young kids taking more medication, ADHD, the big diagnosis with ADHD. We will see a correlation here, that we talked to scientists, and they told us that there's a correlation. If you put your kids too early in front of a screen, cognitive development, they cannot recuperate that when they're very young. So we try to make difference and see why we need that, because we cannot just come with a recommendation and see, we want to do that for fun. Is because we see levels, we see younger ladies that have troubles with eating disorders because we saw that what they see with influencers, Sephora kids, Dr. Griffith, Sephora kids is, I don't know if you have Sephoras in England, but we have it here. It's like all makeup and stuff, and we have influencers, and we have younger girls that they want to look at a certain type, they want to buy stuff, and and they don't feel themselves well, and they get hooked on it, and it's very problematic. So we try to make those relations, but in the end, if we want to stop our kids to be in their phones and playing video games, we have to offer them something else. We know that screens, we know that phones, we know that iPads, we know that IA is here. They're here to stay. But now, how do we save them? That's why, and I wanted to add something to what Dr. Griffith said sometimes it's overuse and sometimes it's addiction. But do we take the chance? Do we take the chance with our kids and not offering them something else? And and there's a chapter here, it's on prevention, on the kid and the parents, and he said, this is something that you should look for, be careful. And so we might have some policies in that report, but also it was important for us to make the parents aware through the words of the scientific field in our report.
Yeah, that's great. You have the recommendations for parents as well as some policies and regulations for the technologies. So we already did the first round of the conversation. So I'm going to ask more deeper questions about some vulnerable population. So let's say it's a question for Mark. So how does excessive use affect users' emotional regulation? So self-control or mental health. And I know that these characteristics or features are a bit different when you are a kid than when you are adults. So I would like you to explain a bit more about these things. And are there specific traits or cognitive patterns that make some people more vulnerable to these behaviors?
Okay, well, there's obviously hundreds of studies that have looked at problematic social media use now. So we know that if you look at what I would call the meta-analytic evidence, so I like to look at meta-analyses that put all the studies together, and you can look at particular comorbid behaviors and particular personality traits. So if we take, I'm sure most of you have heard of what's called the Big Five. Okay, so we look at things like extroversion, we look at neuroticism, conscientiousness, etc. What comes up in the addiction literature, and also specifically the social media addiction literature, is in personality traits, is that people who are genuinely addicted to social media, or at the very least have a problematic social media use, they tend to be far more neurotic. So they're more highly neurotic than those that don't have problems, and they tend to have very low conscientiousness. So in terms of ability to study and focus, etc., that seems to be there. We also know there was a recent meta-analysis that looked at the relationship between impulsivity and social media addiction. Again, they found that there was a high correlation between impulsivity and problematic social media use. We also know from a mental health perspective, almost every single mental health variable that's been looked at, whether it's depression and depression symptoms, anxiety, social anxiety, stress, loneliness, self-esteem, all of those are in the expected directions that you would find is that people who have problematic social media use are more likely to be depressed, more likely to have anxiety or anxiety disorders, they're more likely to be lonely, more likely to have low self-esteem, more likely to suffer from stress. However, the one thing I would say about this is that there can be these can go in two ways, and they can actually be bi-directional. Sometimes people are anxious and stressed and lonely, so they go on social media to try and actually alleviate those things. Some people were not depressed or anxious or lonely, but by actually going on social media and becoming problematic users, end up being depressed and anxiety. And there's also people that they will have a bi-directional relationship. It will actually go both ways in those situations. So we know, all I would say is that the problem we've got at the moment is that there are very few longitudinal studies. We've got lots and lots of self-selected samples, cross-sectional research, which use what I would say is very low quality of data. In the UK, for instance, we've never had a national representative study that's looked at social media use across the children and adolescents of the UK, mainly because that would cost a real lot of money to actually do. Okay. And so me as researchers, we end up doing the path of least resistance, and we end up doing lots of online surveys where we can collect data very quickly with self-selected samples, looking at all these different psychological variables. And as I say, I think the literature, even in amongst these small, low quality, self-selected samples, does tend to suggest the same things again and again and again, that there are quite clearly psychological variables that are associated with problematic social media use. And I just want to agree with something that was just said before, is that there are lots of generic risk factors. Okay, so it isn't just a case that there are personality risk factors or comorbid risk factors. It is quite clear that when we combine those comorbid and psychological predispositions with things like access, affordability, anonymity. Now, one of my good friends who's now died, way back in 2001, when we were researching internet addiction, there was something called the AAA model, which actually said the AAA stood for accessibility, affordability, anonymity. These were three generic factors that when they intermixed with these predisposed psychological traits could make people more susceptible to have an online addiction. Of course, social media addiction is quite clearly an online addiction. Then Kim Young, who unfortunately is no longer with us, she had what was called the ACE model. Okay, the ACE model stood for anonymity, convenience, and escape. And again, when those generic risk factors, that these things that make online addictions more attractive, when they interact with those predispositions in terms of personality traits like neuroticism, with low conscientiousness, with high impulsivity, it's quite clear that we've got a heady mix there, and that there is no one single reason why somebody becomes addicted to something like social media or develops problems with it. It's quite clearly an integrated mixture of these structural characteristics, situational characteristics, and personal characteristics. And we have to remember is that even though I'm a psychologist, and obviously psychology is within the person, addictions do not just reside within the individual. Yes, there may be these personality traits that are predictive of addiction and that are associated with addiction, but we should never take away the fact that the situational characteristics in terms of how social media is marketed, how it is advertised, and the fact that it's now just everywhere in terms of high accessibility, when you then combine it with the structural characteristics, what the biggest for me, the structural characteristic, the like button was, for me, is a defining structural characteristic of problematic social media use, because obviously addictions are all about rewards. Okay, we psychologists, we call those rewards reinforcements. You cannot become addicted to something unless you're being constantly rewarded for it. And of course, when you're on social media, the rewards that you do on social media can come thick and fast. And remember, when we're talking about social media, this is not just one activity. If you go onto Facebook now, on Facebook, you can play games on Facebook, you can gamble on Facebook, you can put videos on Facebook, you can put your text messages on Facebook. There are so many different activities, and all of these come thick and fast and have a very high event frequency. And again, what we know about addiction from a psychological perspective is that when you've got high event frequency activities, it's those activities that are more potentially addictive.
Thank you so much. Yeah, you reminded me of a series on Netflix, The Painkiller. And I think when you talk about the marketing stuff, and that's very important, I think, how these companies actually try to market the social media, let's say. And they try to say, okay, it's good for everybody, they can have free speech, they can have access to many knowledge sharing, all those things. And yes, that's might be half of the story, but not the other part. And you talked about the rewarding systems, and I just wanted to make sure that, is that true that if we have a kind of problematic behavior, it means that we have some issues with our rewarding system in our brain? And if that's true, if we are vulnerable to, for example, I don't know, any other sort of addiction, like even substitute addictions, is that true that we might be even vulnerable to social media addiction? So is it the kind of infectious effect of addiction? So if I'm addicted to cocaine, I can be addicted to social media quite easier than the other people. So is that true?
Sorry, you're asking me that question?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah, okay. Okay, can I just say for a start, so I wrote a paper back in 2017. It was called The Myth of Addictive Personality. So I don't believe that there is an addictive personality that, if you're, because a lot of addicts will say to you, the reason I'm addicted to alcohol, or the reason I'm addicted to cocaine, or the reason I'm addicted to sex, or the reason I'm addicted to video games or social media is I've got an addictive personality. For me, that's a complete cop-out. That's actually not taking responsibility for some of your actions. And in fact, there is no evidence that there is a single personality trait that's addictive or predictive, predictive of addiction and addiction alone. However, personality traits quite clearly do play a role in the acquisition, development, and maintenance of some types of addiction. And there are quite clearly predisposing factors that lots of people will have, which does mean that a particular substance or a particular behavior can come along, which, if you have got those predispositions, will actually make that person more vulnerable. So it is true in that sense. So even though I don't believe in the concept of addictive personality, I do believe there are people with addictive predispositions, whether that's a biological or genetic predisposition, or whether it's some kind of psychological predisposition, which will quite clearly is that, whether it's social media, whether it's gaming, whether it's sex, whether it's work, whether it's exercise, is that these behaviors, because of its rewarding features, can actually reward you both biologically and physiologically as well as psychologically. Obviously I'm not a biologist, but I know that when we look at the effect of things like the pleasure chemicals, dopamine in the body, that dopaminergic pathways, we found those in social media, we found those in gaming, we found those in gambling, we found those in other more traditional substances. When you do magnetic resonance imaging and you see the way the brain lights up when you're gaming, on social media and drug use, etc., there are lots and lots of neurochemical, there's lots of neurochemical similarities, there are behavioral similarities, there are psychological similarities, and that's why when I use the word addiction, I do apply it across the piece. I do believe in predispositions. We also know, of course, is that adolescents tend to be more, and emerging adults tend to be more vulnerable to lots of these addictions, not just social media, but addictions right across the piece. Again, and I'm not a biologist, but any neurobiologist will probably tell you this, is that the child and the adolescent brain, it's hardwired to find basically these risky behaviors far more rewarding. Okay, so when you're 18 years of age, when you drink alcohol, when you gamble, when you're on social media, you find it far more exciting and arousing than when you're 45. Okay, we talk about adolescence. Adolescence really doesn't stop until about the age of 25. It's only about the age of 25 that our brains are fully cognitively mature, and that's why I believe from a biological perspective is that children and adolescents are far more vulnerable to lots of different addictive behaviors, including social media use and gaming, is because their brains are hardwired to get those reinforcing and rewarding properties from these high event frequency activities that are highly accessible and highly affordable within the environment around them. So as I say, that's why even though I'm a psychologist, I take this biopsychosocial view, is that as a psychologist, you can't ignore biology, you can't ignore sociology. It's quite clearly an integrated mix of all these different disciplines, all these different factors that explain how people acquire, develop, and maintain addictive behaviors.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So as the social media is really a complex phenomenon, and we have some sort of predisposition and definitely vulnerable people like the kids. So let's see how technologies are actually amplifying those vulnerabilities. So Mahdi, could you tell us to what extent do recommender algorithms and personalization systems amplify addictive behavior?
Okay, yeah, so I can say that the main role that they play, in one word, is that they densify the rewarding behavior. So we're interested in different, each individual is interested in certain types of things that they do on social media, and as Mark said, we do many different things. We can do, let's say we can read news, we can send message to people, we can write something, we can take videos, or in terms of the content that we consume on social media, I mean, the topics are not the same, so we are interested in a variety of things, and that is unique to each person. But before the recommender system, before algorithms come into play, it was very difficult to personalize this rewarding experience for everyone. But now it's much easier. They can easily, with 1 or 2 days of data, they can start to learn what you're interested in, what topics you like. And then if you think of your experience, if you are someone who go on, let's say, TikTok or Instagram, and you keep browsing through the reels, you see that the way they are ordered is also, it's not something that you can predict and expect. And this is, again, this unexpected aspect is also something that, research in psychology shows that, it contributes to the formation of this overuse habit, or let's say in extreme cases, addiction. So just give you an example, if you're interested in cooking, if you're interested, you see a lot of videos on cooking, but in the middle, it's not that always you can predict that the next reel is on cooking. 2 months ago, you searched something about, I don't know, an animation, like Family Guy clip, okay? And you see something in between that, there is, suddenly you see a clip of something that you searched a long time ago, and that's because they know that they cannot let you predict everything that you see. Because again, this unexpectedness, it's something that's, it contributes significantly to the formation of this addictive behavior. So that's mainly the role of all these algorithms, that they understand what you're interested in, and also they understand how to order the content that that it's very likely that you develop a habit, or let's say, again, extreme case of addiction.
Yeah, and what you were saying actually reminds me of the recent announcement from Meta, and they said it's going to be really scary. Now they have their own platform, GEM, Generative Advertising Personalization Recommendations. So previously, the marketers need to define the demographic that they want to reach out. So they had their ads, they just launched it on Meta systems like Instagram or Facebook. But now Meta says, okay, we take care of that part for you. So we know the customers, we know what they want to see, and we can define, okay, what kind of, your content can be related to which person. And it's going to be, and they said, okay, it's 4 times more efficient, and it's going to be more, because it's more personalized. And it's going to be crazy. Yeah.
Scary.
Exactly. So given the impact of these systems, let's bring in the policy dimension again. So Mr. Shikoni, do you think regulations alone can make a meaningful difference, or should we collaborate with these tech giants, or at least education sector?
Well, we have to. I mean, I don't think there's another way, because if we only do regulations, it's up to have regulations on certain big tech company like Apple, Facebook, or Meta. I've talked to Apple about 3 weeks ago, and we had an honest discussion, and I like their approach, because they saw a report and they said, you know what, is there something we can do to help you guys, to help get things better? Because I believe they want to get things better, they want to get things safer for the kids. But on the other hand, it's very tough to apply. It's very, very tough to apply. Because if you look at all the internet, it's not only one jurisdiction. It's like it's across the world. Even though they have conditions about the age of their platform at 14 years old. Well, I tell them, I said, why you only have one little space on your front page that are you 18? Are you under 18 or over 18 or 14? Just click and turn it. So anybody can lie. There's no way to verify. So of course we need to work together. How is it going to be done? You know what? Maybe you have more chance asking the 2 other people around the table than me. But on the other end, also, when we see the educational system, and this is something that very worried me, and I will share that with you, is when we ask the question, because before going forward, when we talk to psychologists, psychiatrists, we talk to many scientific people that we met, we ask them, so what is the screen time? First of all, let's agree on what is screen time. Is it video games, TV, iPad, phone only, educational platform in schools? Because here in Quebec, pretty much every school, the teacher is not with the clay anymore and the board. He's doing it on a technology board, and he's doing with his finger or a pen. So is that screen time when the teacher teaches on something like that and he goes from page to page? Do we add that on the screen time of the youngsters? And some scientific came to us. He goes, you know what? We cannot answer that question, because the technology is too fast for science, And that really scared me. In that matter, another matter also, but in that matter, I said, you cannot come up because, well, we don't have the numbers yet. We don't have the, we're looking for it. We will eventually have it, but technology goes faster. So me, as a legislator, my question is technology, and maybe my two friends here can ask, is technology too fast for science? Is it going to go too fast with IA now? We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg of IA, what we can do with it. So this is very worrying about all the situations. So, of course, we need to work all together, but we'll finally put like a lid on everything to make sure that all our kids are protected. Well, I don't want to be very negative, but with what I'm here, what for the last year, it's going to be very difficult. I don't think I'll see it in my living days. Unfortunately, it's maybe sad what I'm saying, but I don't think
that's true.
It's going to be tough.
Yeah, that's true. I think with the AI now, with the Gen AI, I think I've read something that says in the last 6 months, we generated data as much as we generated the whole human being in the earth. So yeah, that's going to be crazy, and the technology is really fast. But I have a follow-up question on the policies and the ban actually you mentioned on social media use or the phone use during the school time. So do you have, because I know it's going to be only 4 or 5 months that it was in place. So do you have any early results of that from parents, students, something?
Well, you know what? It was a little bit. It's a little bit early to see the difference, to see the results on that.
Yeah, sure.
But the opinion, the parents' opinion, the parents were pretty much happy with that. And that, I mean, that's when we know that we did something right. And also, we know we did something right when all the kids are mad at us. Because I was in the school about 3 days ago for a conference and about my job as a member of parliament, and we started to talk about screens, phones, and I asked them, "Is there anything that you would like to talk about?" And they're smart kids. Goes, "Well, Mr. Ciccone, you were vice chair on the commission, and is it your fault that we don't have our phones anymore?" I said, "You know what? I'll be honest with you. I think it is a little bit, and we're doing that for your own good." And they weren't happy with it. They weren't happy with it, and something was funny, because when we were talking about the kids and we asked them, I said, "Would you, let's say we put it to 18 years old, the age to be on social media, we're trying stuff with them, they all agreed, but for the next generation." They didn't agree for them. They agreed for the next generation. They agreed for their little sisters, little brothers. That's what they wanted. That's what they wanted to. They wanted to do. But in conclusion, I would just like to share something that really saddened me. And it's not only like a tech problem or a social media problem, but I think it became a society problem. When I asked one question I asked that really broke my heart is when I told him, I said, "You know what, guys," and to the kids, because we asked a lot of questions to the kids in schools and stuff, and 25% raised their hand, 50%, it depended. But when I asked this question, I said, "Who here in this class and that's 500 people, 500 kids that we met," and it was like that everywhere. Who here in the class would like to spend more time, do activities with their parents? 100% of the kids raised their hands, and they're teenagers. I mean, who wants to spend time with their parents when you're a teenager? I mean, you know what? My mom would bring me to school and would say, "Mom, not in front. I don't want my friends to see with you, And you see those teenagers saying now, these days, "I want to spend more time with my parents," And I asked a follow-up question. I said, "Well, how many kids here would they would spend more time on their phones or social media if they had activities with their parents?" 100% of the kids raised their hands. So, you know what? That tells you a lot. You don't need a lot of research. Just a few questions like that, that there's a society problem. And my message is to the kids, to the parents, wake up, parents. Wake up, parents, because you're losing your kids. We are losing our kids.
Yeah, That's completely true. So now let's see what can be done at personal, technological, and governmental level. So again, go back to Mark. So what should individuals do to maintain healthy and intentional social media habits? And is there a risk that calling it addictive oversimplifies or stigmatizes users?
Okay, well, I'll take the last bit first. I mean, the word addiction has just become so overused. People talk about that's addictive television watching, that's addictive reading. Unfortunately, people use the word addiction in a pejorative, almost, attractive, enhancing sense. And obviously, when I'm using the word addiction, I'm using it in a very clinical sense. I think some people can be stigmatized by using the word addiction. Some people actually say having a label for something actually helps them feel better. But I actually think when it comes to social media, very few people are, by my definition, addicted in the first place. But we have got this problematic behavior. In terms of what we, have to do about it, I'm sorry that we have that in terms of prevention. There's so many different things that can happen at so many different levels. Quite clearly is that digital literacy has to be at the heart of all school curricula now, and that you ask any teacher what they think is the biggest problem in terms of educating children, and they will tell you it's the kids spending time on their smartphones. The kids are addicted to smartphones, and I keep having to say to teachers, children are no more addicted to smartphones than alcoholics are addicted to bottles. And it goes back to, I think, what Mahdi was saying before, is that people aren't addicted to people aren't addicted to the internet or addicted to smartphones. They're addicted to the behaviors they can do on the particular hardware systems. So we have to start at schools. We also have to actually educate both teachers and parents as well about the fact that, whether it's gaming, whether it's smartphones, whether it's gambling, I mean, all of these things are, children love these risky but rewarding behaviors. Okay. These are often behaviors that, make children feel more adult to start with. Now, I'm somebody, my main area of research is in gambling addiction. And I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel when it comes to things like social media addiction. So, for instance, the gambling industry, because they're heavily regulated, to get an operating license now is that the gambling industry has to show what they're doing in terms of player protection and harm minimization. And I would be saying that social media operators like Meta have to be doing the same things. They haven't usually got a regulator like we have gambling regulators, but there needs to be a regulator. And if you're going to put a product out there that is potentially problematic and addictive to a small minority of people, is that you have to have basically tools out there that people can use as a way that promotes safer use of that product. So in the gambling industry, one thing that you'll find on almost all online gambling sites now is there are limit setting tools. You've got deposit limits, loss limits, win limits, okay, time limits. Is that, if you made these mandatory, parents could set these for the children. You set up their technology so that you can't spend more than a certain amount of time, certain amount of hours on the day with social media. I mean, the other thing, the one thing that none of us have mentioned actually on the panel so far, which is probably one of the biggest things that keeps people, particularly teenagers, on their smartphones, is the fear of missing out. There is a huge literature now showing that fear of missing out is highly associated with smartphone addiction, social media addiction. And this is, that actually when and I've done it with my own kids, when we go on holiday and we've been to places where there is no Wi-Fi whatsoever, okay? And, my children, I can think when they were 12, 13, they were horrified that they were going to, spend 2 weeks without being able to contact or know what's going on with any of their friends. Actually, within 2 or 3 days, my kids realized that they could live without their smartphone, without being in contact. And when they got back, they very quickly got back, caught up with what they so-called missed out during that, that 2 weeks that they weren't connected. They realized is that the world doesn't, drop out for them, is that they can actually go periods without actually interacting. And that's why I do think having short periods of digital detox, as parents, we should never allow smartphones at the table when we're eating our breakfast, our dinner. There need to be rules at home that, yeah, we don't mind you using smartphones, we don't mind you using social media, but it has to be done, yeah, even within the home in a regulated way that actually doesn't impinge on everything else. So, as I say, when it comes to intervention and prevention, there's got to be digital literacy in schools. Parents and teachers have to be educated about this area themselves. The social media operators, they need to produce things. You say we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. If you look what the gambling industry have done, they've got cool-off periods, there are mandatory play breaks, there are limit-setting features, there are self-exclusion features. All of these technological features that you find to prevent problematic gambling could actually be introduced wholesale by social media operators so that people are not spending inordinate amounts of time on their social media every single day.
Yeah, thank you so much, yeah, for mentioning all the solutions, possible solutions at different levels. And I do believe that technology, in terms of the technology part, I think maybe social media might be a bit different from gambling and other sort of addictions because of the accessibility that we talked about. And the thing is that without regulations, for example, we have infinite scroll, so there's no endpoint for that, right? And it's really hard to convince now to collaborate, let's say, with technology giants to make an end for that. But let's see what kind of digital solutions we might have. And Mahdi, what role do you think that interventions like digital detoxes, usage dashboards, and self-monitoring tools, as Mark said, and AI-driven reminders actually play a role in sustaining real healthy behavior?
Yeah, so you mentioned about type of interventions, and digital detoxing is one of the fancy words that it's been around for the past few years. I think so. Digital detox, I mean, it's a form of abstinence, right? So it's if you basically stop using technology, stop consuming the substance. So we should be careful about judging, about the impact of these interventions. And I can think of, one typical scenario that we do detoxing is that, for example, you're using technology as an adult, and then we get to a certain point that we realize, oh, this is too much. I'm frustrated. I mean, I've used it. I find myself, when I wake up and I'm going to bed, hours of going through infinite content, and then this frustration prompts us, okay, I'm going to stop using it for a couple of days. So this can be helpful, but it's just to make you again emotionally stable again. But it's not going to address the need that made you use the social media in the first place. So it's not going to solve the problem. And if you don't address that properly, if you pick up your phone again in a couple of days, in a couple of weeks, the old habits are going to come back again. So the solution to a bad habit, to overuse, is not to stop doing that behavior, is to replace it with a healthier habit. And one way to do that, and I want to refer to one of the research that we did last year, it wasn't on addiction, but it was on helping people to organize, to spend the time, to allocate their time the way they want onto different types of activities. And one of the things that we realized that people don't have the overview of how they're doing during the day and during the week. It's not easy to do that. So what we did is that we created, it was an application that based on the calendar that people had, it gave them an overview after the day or after the week that, okay, this is how your time is allocated to meeting people, to work out. And then this snapshot, they help people to see, oh, okay, this is not the way I want to use technology. This showed them the discrepancy between how they want to use technology and how they are actually using the technology. So, and I think this is something that it can be easily implemented in operating systems. They already have, for example, Apple, iOS. You have that feature that you can see. Okay, this is I've spent like 3 hours on social media. And it's again something that's scary for many people to just go and look at it. But I think these features, to just give them an overview of how they're doing with the technology, it's very helpful to make them able to self-regulate, to change their behavior, to make it align with the way they want to use technology and not lose the big picture. And I know that you're doing some research, and your thesis is basically about the nudging and interventions. So maybe you can share some of your insight with us too.
Thank you. Yeah, it's you mentioned something. Last week I was checking my phone, and it was sometimes really scary because I was supposed to do a lot of work at home, and I thought that I'm going to spend, let's say, 8 hours working nonstop, something like this. And at the end of the day, I check my phone and see the screen time and how I use different apps. And I saw that, okay, I spent 3 hours on social media. And I said, how did I do that? I didn't have enough time to do that. But I realized that, okay, maybe I just cut my work and I spend more time on social media. And yes, so having an overview can really help. And yeah, I'm doing kind of with a collaboration with a team of engineering. We actually developed a kind of application that now can send notification, vibrate, and give them some sort of nudges. And now I'm testing chatbots because notification is not alive, let's say, but chatbot is more alive. And sometimes when we need mental health support, we cannot access them 24/7 hours, right? With the chatbot, maybe we can develop, maybe we can use AI in a way that can help people instead of just exploiting them. So I'm just testing them. It's in the testing phase now, but yeah, there are different nudges that we are testing and see what kind of combination might work at the end. Yeah, but if anyone is interested, just reach out. I will share more. Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So, and finally, from a policy perspective, how do we turn these ideas into real-world systems? Because I think that that's one of the important things. I know that, okay, technologies should change sometimes. Research is a bit behind because technology is really fast. They are making money. Research has limited sources, so we need to just make balance, and maybe policy can be the bridge here between the gaps. So what practical steps can government take to encourage platforms to adopt more responsible and healthy design principles?
You know, I come from a past and I'll make a relation here, come from a past where I was a professional hockey player in the NHL, the highest league ever. You know, you take the 700 best hockey players in the world. And you know, you can wait for somebody to help you get there. You can take all the steps to get there. Now, your question, and it's a good question, but in my philosophy is, if we have to wait for the government or platform to be responsible in their design, well, I mean, we're putting all our power into the hands of somebody else. I know we have to work with them. I know it's there. I know we cannot be with our kids 24 hours at a time. That I know. But on the other hand, I think the way from day one, when you have your baby in your hand, you know, the decision you will make. Because when I was very young, I said to myself, one day I will play in the NHL. And that was my mind. I put my mind to it, and I made it. Okay, after that, I stumbled and I became a member of parliament. But you know what? That was I said that as a joke, of course. But I say, you know what? I took that, and it was my goal. So if every parent, you know me, I put a lot of responsibility in the parents, and I want to throw rocks at parents. But you know, these are the things that are more, that we love the most, is our kids. You know what? And the way you bring up kids, the way you start with technology with them. I know it'll be tough, you know, when they start to go to school, they start to be teenagers. But you know, if we give them the good seeds, you know, I think that's where we have to put our energy as parents. And of course, you know, with the platforms, I know they want to work, I know they want to help, but on the other hand, it's a private company. They still have to they want to make money. They want to make their shareholders very happy. You know, they want to bring money, the price up. So, you know, of course, they say one thing, but on the other hand, there's another goal for them. So, you know, but for me, that's why I say take matters to your own hands, start your kids well, give them the good, the good values, and cut Wi-Fi at 6 o'clock at night. You can do that. Don't give your son or your daughter the phone when he goes into his or her room. Offer him something else. More activities. Work with the school system. You're part of the parents committee. Well, ask the school to give you more access to the playing time, more hours after schools to do sports, do cultural activities. These are the things that if you offer a kid to have fun, play in the water, swim, or in the dark basement with a screen in his face, if you show them the two when they're young, I'm not a scholar like all you guys, I'm not a doctor, but if it would be me, of course I would choose what's fun, socialize with kids, and be a part of a group, and be a part of a team. This is what because here in Quebec, and I will make a conclusion with that. Something that breaks my heart is that all the kids that play sports, every sports federation, well, it's going down. The inscriptions are going down and down every year. That bothers me also.
That's completely true. So with all that said, I have a couple of more questions, but before I go through them, they are more kind of a general questions, or some of them are more detailed questions. I would like to know if anyone in person or online has any questions.
There were a couple questions in the chat. I could read one out. The second one I think was already touched on, but the questions are coming from Timia. The first one, it's a little bit long, but I'll read it. While hyperconnectivity can create the impression of social engagement, research shows that excessive social media use often imitates rather than nurtures genuine connection, and this leaving many people feeling lonelier than in-person interactions would. And while stepping back from digital spaces, like, for example, checking messages less frequently, that can help in theory, but it also comes with the reality, and that's not just a fear, the reality of missing out on opportunities and further isolating the individual. Now, given this tension, what would you suggest for cultivating healthy technology use while in social settings?
Thank you. So I think, Mark, it's going to be you to address this question.
Well, I kind of touched on it earlier, really, because I do think the fear of missing out is such a key factor that perpetuates people's social media use. And so you have to learn from a very young age about delayed gratification, and that's where parents, and I agree with what was said before, is that parents play such a key role in modeling their children in terms of their future behavior. And now I see parents giving smartphones to 5-year-old kids, which obviously I didn't even get a smartphone until I was in my 30s. It just and I don't think people can and do live without smartphones. In fact, people won't believe this, but between 2019 and 2024, I gave up my smartphone completely. I didn't even have one, and the only reason I got one again is because banks won't let me authenticate my financial dealings without having a smartphone now. I actually didn't want to get one, but now I've been forced to get one by other commercial companies out there. But yeah, and I do think there is some truth to what was just said there about that relationships online can be different from face-to-face relationships. But I don't like to, I'm not come from the school that doing things face-to-face all the time is necessarily better than doing things online, particularly because we now interact online all the time. COVID was a really good example. When I was teaching online, not meeting my friends, having to meet online. Yes, we would have loved to have seen them face-to-face and in person, but we realized actually life can and does go on, and we learnt to live. And in fact now, even in academic settings now, we still now meet online rather than meet face-to-face, because people realize there was lots of time-saving features to do that. I just think we live in a blended world now, and so it is a case of having social skills and being in person, and you also need kind of digital etiquette online as well, so-called netiquette. You have to learn how to interact online and have relationships online, because there's so many things in our work and pleasure lives now that happen online. That is just the way the world is now. We tend to do things online. there is no point banning or prohibiting things because the genie is already out the bottle. So it is about educating people from a very early age that digital literacy is a really important thing to do. But as I say, the formation of social relationships and how you do it, that has to start from a very early age. And the place where that starts, unfortunately, has to be with parents. You know, by the time kids get to school and, you know, teachers are giving, you know, a lot of onus on teachers to do stuff. But even by the age of 5 or 6, behaviors are greatly ingrained in children even before they get to school. And it's the parents that are doing it. And if the parents are sitting at home on their screens all the time, on their smartphones, then the kids are going to mimic and do that as well. But it does come back to this fear of missing out, is that for me, if we can get this idea that, you know, you are not necessarily missing out by having these even small periods of digital detox, you know, having, you know, hours in the day where you don't, you're not on your smartphone, you're not engaged on your social media, and realizing that you can and do, and life goes on. People, you know, the more you normalize that the better.
Yeah, thank you. So, do you want to add anything? That's fine. And from my side, I think because the social media is a complex phenomenon, we cannot, and there are too many actors working there. So it's not only the kids, it's also the parents, because it's really hard to want people to just leave their phones and they just see the parents that 24 hours they are on their phones. So it's really hard to just do the restrictions. And sometimes it's hard to spend with our kids, spend more time with the kids, because again, the parents are busy with the technology in other sides of their lives. And I think maybe the solution is just a collaboration with all the actors. Like, we definitely need restrictions for some ages because they haven't developed this self-control in their brain. And we might need to have some substitute activities for their parents, and we might have some solutions, maybe make their life a bit easier so they have more flexible work hours. And on the other side, we also need something for the adults, right? Like nudging systems, some interventions to help also others to just control their screen time. Because if the parents don't control, so it's going to be the same pattern for the kids, because I think that's going to be true in psychology. So we just follow our parents, how they behave, and how we grown up in a family, that how they behave to each other or with their lives. It's going to be, we just try to mimic that unconsciously maybe. So we need to have all these things, and that's why just it makes it really hard thing. Yeah.
Can I add something?
Sure.
You know, you talked about, you know, what monkey see, monkey do, you know, and of course we call it technoference. You know, when you see your parents with the phone in his hand, well, you replicate that, or when your parents will say, well, put your phone down. Your kid will answer back to you, well, Dad, you have your phone in your hands for the last 12 hours. But the thing is also, which is something we didn't talk about, or if we've talked about it, I missed it, but a lot of these kids have phones because the parents want to be in contact with their kids 24/7. I'm like, really? I mean, where were the days where we would go outside at 8 o'clock, you know, and we would go play and come back for lunch and go back to the park and go back to the hockey rink and skate and come back for dinner at night, you know, and we're not dead. I mean, and I don't think that our world is more dangerous, you know, but I don't know what happened, you know, in the society that now we have to know exactly where their kids, and a lot of parents said, you know, you cannot do that, don't do that. I want to know if there's a change in the schedule of my kid, or, I mean, if there's something, don't worry, there's something very important, the school will contact you like they did before. We all have phones now, we'll still have some land phones, not as much anymore, but parents have their phones. So, you know, the problem sometimes comes from the other side too, that they want the parents. And I saw a kid, just in the conclusion, I saw a kid at school, he showed up and there was like 25, 30 kids, and he came in and you could see that kid had something special. He said, I don't know what's going on with that kid. Something, you know, he's lively, he had like red, you know, face, you know, he was looked healthy. And the first question was, who has a smartphone? Everybody raised their hand except him. He didn't have a phone. He goes, no, my parents doesn't want me to have a phone. I do activities, I do hockey, I do soccer, and this weekend we do this and that. So this kid, and he looked with colors. He didn't look as pale as all his other friends because, you know, these kids with the phone, they live inside pretty much. So that's something I wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you. Matthew, you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think, that digital literacy, it's something very important that people know the consequences of how they're using technology. So if they know the consequences, then it's much easier because there is no like one solution, one proper use of technology for everyone. So we use technology for different reasons and in different like amount of time that we spend on technology. So there is no like one proper way. So it depends on how each person uses, and to find the healthy habit of using technology for every person, first of all, they need to know what are the consequences, why they're using, and also, of course, they need to have the proper tools to monitor their behavior and implement the preventive measures that they want. So it should be as easy as using the features of social media. It should be as easy also to know how you're using the technology and also to implement a feature like putting limits on certain applications or certain type of activities that you do with your phone.
Yeah, that's completely true. So with that said, do we have more questions? Oh,
We do have a question here in the space, and if anyone has any questions online, as they know, you can pop it into the chat.
Thank you all for your interventions, and thank you, Iman, for putting on such a wonderful and informative event. My name is Francesco. I'm a PhD candidate in political science, so I'm very interested in what all of you are saying, but I'm particularly interested in what you are saying, Mr. Ciccone, about policy. You had discussed some of the proposed solutions to social media overuse. The one that's being implemented right now in Quebec is like the removal of phones from the classroom, to restrict access to social media in that way, rather than necessarily regulating it to operate in a healthier way, or like regulating what social media is allowed to do, which obviously there's jurisdictional issues there for sure. But I guess my question is, should governments generally try to regulate the operation of social media, and how effective can that type of regulation be in the face of an American government right now that is so eager and willing to use trade and tariff policy to protect digital companies' ability to operate however they want to maximize their profits?
There's a lot of things in your question, and of course, I'm sure, as you know or may know, there's been a lot of there's been legislation in Australia, in Sweden. We talked to people from Great Britain also, and it's trial and error right now because if we think it's relatively new, all this technology and social media. Of course, it has many years, but in time is relatively new. So it's very tough. And as you know, a policy when you want to do legislation on something or another, it doesn't mean it's going to pass. You know what? Because if it doesn't pass the test of the courts, it can be repealed. So there's always that thinking in our heads before we go forward. We don't want to be the ones who bring a law forward and gets repealed in court. So it doesn't look really good politically wise. But if you talk about all the platforms and everything, that we've been advocates to make sure that the GAFAM, all the Google and all these platforms pay their share of their taxes, so we can take that money and maybe help kids get better. Maybe make kids do more sports, do more, use better healthy living choices. We can use that kind of money to do that. So this is what we're doing right now. But let me tell you something. You'll be a doctor soon politics, come and see me when you're done. All right, when you get, maybe you should come and see me. We always need good young people like you in politics. You know what? So of course, you know, if we could do something, if it would be that easy, it would have been done already. It would have been done already because we had so many suggestions, but it's really, really, really tough to get going with this situation. But to my conclusion, I wanted to, because it's important for me to say it, but in the report, we asked the Institut National de Santé Publique, I'm sure you know what that is. It's there to protect us. And the work they do is that they take all the situation, the good, the bad, they study it, and they see it money-wise also. How much would it cost the society to pay for it? And now what we've asked them is that, you know what, is it more financially better to do like a policy, what it would cost versus the good we would do? Because sometimes we don't want to put something in place and it's going to do more harm and it's going to cost more money. It doesn't help anybody. So that's why we have organization like ISSBQ that is there to do the work and to analyze everything before we do something. Thank you for your question.
Thank you. So do we have any?
There was another question coming in. There's a couple questions coming in Zoom. One from Tuba who asked, "What if you had any suggestions for digital well-being for the older generation?" However you want to define that, I suppose.
That's true. I think because I've seen that, for example, the number of older people on Meta, for example, Facebook accounts, they just create new Facebook accounts. It's really growing in a faster rate than the other generations. So it's like the older generations are also feeling lonely. So that's why they wanted to be on social media. But I think we don't have that much of, I don't know, maybe Mark can say it better, but we don't have that much of social media overuse, or at least the negative consequences of the social media overuse with the older people.
Yeah, I mean, I know of very little research that's looked at older people's use of digital media. It's quite clear that you just mentioned it there, is that older people who do, you know, when you get to 65, 70, 75, can feel more lonely. And obviously, going on social media there is quite clearly a help. It's actually helping people regulate their emotions, feeling better about themselves, raising self-esteem. And probably at that age, when you're not having to work anymore and you are in retirement, it's something that's actually positive and life affirming in your life, which is probably why there's so, you know, most research gets done when there's a social problem. And the fact there doesn't seem to be a social problem amongst older people using social media. I mean, if we find out that there is people out there that are somehow neglecting all their duties and the things they should be doing because they're on social media, then we as researchers would look at it. But we know that the things we tend to look at is where people are crying out for help, and teachers and parents are saying is that smartphone use, particularly social media on smartphones, is something that's interrupting education. It's interrupting physical education. It's something that we see as the role models and the people that teach these children. These are the things that we see as issues. And I haven't really seen it amongst the older age communities. That's not to say it's not out there, but I've just not seen it expressed as a problem. And it is say when things becomes problems, that's when we tend to do the research.
Yeah, thank you so much. Do you want to add anything? No. So do we have more questions? Or
Not any questions right now. There's a question from Holly, but I believe we've touched on that already. Holly, feel free to clarify if not. So is there any other questions here in the space? No? Okay.
no? Okay, so with all that said, I think we should conclude with saying there's no one-fits-all solution for social media overuse, definitely. And we need more collaboration between government, education, academia, and maybe more regulations on technology giants. So thank you all. Thank you again for being with us, and thank you for joining us today, both in person and online. Have a good one. Thank you.
Thank you, Iman. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your questions. Also, for those of you joining us online, we'll be closing up the Zoom now, but just let you know, I I think we're going to make a version of this available on our YouTube if everyone's okay with that. We'll check. But anyway, thanks again for joining us. It's always wonderful to work with public scholars. That's where we get to find out work like Iman is doing. And just thank you all for joining us. Okay, have a great afternoon.